Welcome to Brave. Be inspired by the best leaders of Southeast Asia tech. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. I'm Jeremy Au, a VC, founder, and father. Join us for transcripts, analysis, and community at www.jeremyau.com. Hi, Elaine. Excited to have you on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Jeremy.
I'm really excited to share your story because I first met you in Clubhouse and I was like, wow, this person is so fun, so warm, and so real. And you have an interesting journey from being a doctor to being a founder and operator. And so it's interesting to share this story with many other folks.
Oh, you're too kind. Absolutely too kind. But the respect is absolutely mutual. So I'm looking forward to share what little I can and see if it might be helpful to anybody who might be hearing it as well.
So Elaine, who are you?
Who am I? My goodness. I wear a whole bunch of different number of hats. I guess professionally, I'm a doctor in palliative care. That's always been my interest and been doing it for over a decade, looking after terminally ill patients in their last days. So I've been doing this in a number of places, whether it's home hospice or inpatient hospice, and currently working part-time with the Ministry of Health and palliative care as well. But that's just one side of me. I guess the other big thing that I'm working on is I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm also an investor. As an entrepreneur, I've started a number of businesses, but the business that I'm working on and I'm incredibly passionate about right now is a company called Trehaus, Trehaus. It's a space out here in Singapore where we started. And it was created to solve problems that I saw a lot of myself as a working parent and as somebody who really wanted to see my kids grow up with the best education. So we have a co-working office with childcare where parents can work just a few steps away from where their kids are being looked after by wonderful caregivers. And so you don't have to choose between career and family anymore. And that really solved the problem that I saw as a working parent. And I'm also incredibly passionate about education and in particular, early education. I really believe like the whole world is changing. Everything's being disrupted by technology. And yet the one thing that hasn't changed in decades is education and in particular, education for really young children. And it's so important. It's where we shape them and prepare them for the future. And I want to raise kids who are going to be change makers of the future, who are passionate about making a difference in society, who have the skills that are important in the future, who have empathy and grit and are ready for a very different world. And so I also started a preschool and childcare called Trehaus School. And this takes kids from 18 months to 6 years. And we've been developing this program and curriculum for many years right now. And it's really doing that, raising change makers of the future, of the next generation. And trying to really make a difference to the legacy we leave in these little lives. So that's my work side of things. I also, as you've heard, I'm also an entrepreneur. So I've really, as a female entrepreneur, recognized that there are quite a lot of challenges that we face as women and starting businesses. So I also run a nonprofit social enterprise called CRIB, CRIB, which is really focused on empowering women to achieve their business dreams through networking, through mentorship, and so on and so forth. And we also have a 3% of VC funding goes to women. And so we try and level that playing field a little bit also by running what we call Pitch Perfect Plus, which matches our amazing female founders with a curated set of investors in our CRIB Angels Club, which is made up of VCs, high net worth individuals, and angel investors who are interested in funding women-led startups. So I run that, and we also have a charity arm that helps support women and children in need. So that's the stuff that I do. And then I'm also a mom of 3. I've got 3 little boys. Not so little, I suppose, 10, 8, and 4. And I guess motherhood is a huge part of my life as well and has shaped all the other stuff that I'm doing. So I guess that's a short nutshell of what I've been on.
Thank you, Elaine. And what's interesting, I've got to go to back at the beginning, is why did you decide to be a doctor? Did you know that you want to be a doctor? Did you know what you were signing up for? Because I have a lot of doctor friends who did that decision very early. And so how do you think about that decision?
The funny thing is, before I was going to university, I was trying to decide between being a doctor. I come from a family of doctors, so it's always somewhat ingrained in me that that could be one of the paths that I'm going to take. But I was actually also really passionate about entrepreneurship and business. And I started my first business when I was in junior college, actually, when I was 17 years old, with another of my dear friends who also is a huge entrepreneur right now. But we started our first business when we were 17. And so I always had all these business ideas and things that I wanted to do in entrepreneurship and a deep passion for it. So I was trying to decide between going to med school or business school, because I also been brought up with a really deep sense of wanting to give back to people. And as a doctor, it's like a very clear way that you can do that as well. In either situation, the intent would have been to be able to give back to society in one way or other, to be able to make a difference in other people's lives and make an impact, whether it's through business or med school. But I, in the end, chose med school because I figured you can actually go to med school first and become a doctor and then do business later. But it's a lot harder to actually start in business and then try and become a doctor later. So it was like a practical decision to just go to med school first. And I'm glad that I did it. Very glad that I've been in a position to be able to, still pursue my business dreams in the end and through entrepreneurship. But I'm also still able to give back to society in my own way through, especially in my work in palliative care, which I find deeply meaningful and impactful. And yeah, I'm glad to have been able to have that opportunity to do that.
I love it. So if you can't figure out which one you should do both. Just sequence them in the right way. So there you are, you're studying to be a doctor, and then you become a doctor. What's interesting is that you chose to specialize in palliative care, something that is not very common. A lot of people are choosing to be specialists in something hard. But palliative care, that's not a common path for so many folks. So tell us more about how you discovered that was the way you wanted to specialize.
Sure. I mean, it's a field that's actually very new in palliative care. So I always knew, even when I was mid school, that I had a huge heart for the elderly and that I wanted to do something in that space, helping the elderly in particular. And so when I was in housemanship, I had a mentor who I looked up to immensely, who was a geriatrician. And my intent was to maybe do geriatrics, which is looking after the elderly. But this mentor, he looked at me and he said, I think that you might be suited to look at palliative care. There's this role. Why don't you think about joining that? And I was like, what is palliative care? I didn't think that I actually want to do it, because when I found out what it is all the patients are dying. I didn't really know. But then I started out at that time, HCA Hospice Care, which is a home care provider where they actually go to the homes of people who are terminally ill to provide care for them. And I started there, and I just have been in the palliative care space ever since, because I've got to be honest, when I first started out at the palliative care, it was hard to see the patients die. And then, so that first bump was hard. And then after that, you start developing relationships also with the patients. And then it gets even harder because you develop the relationship with this patient and then they pass away. Over time, I've actually came to understand that so many of my patients, they're really quite ready to go. They've lived full lives. And my role is really to, what we like to say, it's not about adding days to life, it's about adding life to days. There's so much meaning in being able to add this richness to the last days of their lives, to be able to, a lot of palliative care is not just the clinical and medical part, but the psychosocial aspects, where we're helping them to be comfortable for sure, but at the same time, it's like helping them fulfill last wishes, helping with reconciliation, helping them to be doing the things that they want to be doing and making the most of their last days, and helping them prepare a legacy for their loved ones as well. And so it's deeply rewarding when you have that perspective and realize that you can add so much to them as they're in their last days of their lives. It's actually deeply rewarding, and also being able to relieve pain and suffering in the lives of these people. And support is not just the patient themselves, but it's also supporting the next of kin, the families, the relatives. And it's so meaningful. Palliative care is very, very meaningful. And I did mention earlier that a very big part of why I wanted to do it is to just, in one way or other, create a difference, a positive difference in the lives of others. And I really do believe that you are able to do it as a palliative care doctor in a very rich and meaningful way. I've been in that field ever since, and it's just been amazing to also see how this field has really grown since I first started out there. It's really developed, and people recognize nowadays that there are literally just a handful of doctors in palliative care when I started, but now it's like a proper field and people recognize the importance. I think our government has done a great job here in Singapore as well of recognizing that's something that we need to develop and make sure that every person has an ability to access good palliative care and pass away in their preferred place of death. So I think it's really good to be able to see how this whole area has developed and grown, and we're able to impact more lives in their last days as such.
You mentioned something out of everything they said, which was very powerful. But at the start, you said something about getting used to the people that you were taking care of dying on you. So what's it like to be surrounded by so much death? Because most people are not hanging out with people who are dying, maybe some extended family, but it happens far away, it's in hospitals, it's in nursing homes. So it's kind of like insulated. So what's it like to be hanging out with so much death around you?
And assuming this is palliative care, they're aware that they're passing. We were really making the most of their end of days. I actually have to say that it really helps me personally in terms of my perspective. In terms of understanding, because I'm spending my days with people who have 3 months or less of life, sometimes it's just 2 weeks left of life or something like that. It really crystallizes what's important and helps you to have the right perspective, helps me to have the right perspective of what honestly matters. Nobody will say, I wish I had more time working. They will always say, like, I wish I had more time with my family. I wish I had more time with my grandchildren. It's the loved ones that you want to be with and the relationships that really matter at the end of the day. So I think it helps me to have a real perspective on what priorities we should be having in our lives. And I think that's shaped a lot of what I'm doing. Because a lot of people will be telling me, like, you're on one hand working with people who are very old, and then on the other hand working with very young children in my work in Trehaus. How do you reconcile that? And I think it actually ties in together because I'm working with people who are dying. I recognize that there's so much I can do with making sure that the young have an opportunity to live lives and families have the opportunity to live lives that prioritizing things that really matter at the end of their lives. So yeah, I don't know. It lends a different perspective that I think helps me also to not sweat the small stuff as much, I think.
And it's a tough one because there you are in that environment. Do you ever feel your own mortality? I think you kind of talked a little bit about that and started hinting about it because of that perspective. But do you ever feel like your own weight, think about your own death?
I do, inordinately. Naturally you do. I don't fear it. I think I also have a Christian faith. To me, death is not something to be feared because of my beliefs as a Christian. Like, I believe there's something better at the end of it. So I don't look on it with fear so much, but more like, how do I make sure that the life that I live now is as impactful and meaningful as I can make it? But I do think about things like, what do I want to do if I was terminally ill? Where would I want to spend it? What is the disease that I would least like to die from? That sort of like morbid things. I have thought about these things, and it's natural because it's not that morbid in my perspective because I look at it on a very matter of fact way without any fear. And I think that's the important part. And to be thinking about it, to have that view of how precious our lives are and how fleeting our time on earth is and how can we really live it with the most purpose and impact and make it meaningful. So I do think about it, but it's not a bad thing necessarily.
That's very interesting. And I wouldn't call it morbid at all because, like you said, you deal with that on a daily basis and it's your job, it's your day to day. And what's interesting about what you said, of course, is that it's caused you to think about how you live your life and what you want to do. And it's interesting because it almost feels like you have that level of consciousness and acceptance of death that lets you live life. And I think there was a great book called Staring into the Sun by Irvin Yalom, I think. And it just talks about death consciousness and how so much of life is really about people running away from the fact that they're going to die, just scared of death. And so they're busy building fame, building projects, building things in order to overcome or distance that fear. What do you think about that? Do you see that in other folks? You walk around and you see people building stuff that you don't think is very meaningful because you've seen people have that as regret in their last days?
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's not really surprising, but you realize that what people regret at the end of the day is not having actually the relationships. I mean, people want to leave a legacy. I think that's absolutely true. But when push comes to shove, it's actually the relationships that are most treasured, and relationships that are broken or relationships that weren't built. These are the things that people do regret at the end of the day, not having treasured the moments with the little ones. And that's, I think, what people think about in the end. I mean, legacy also tends to be about leaving a message for your next generation if they have children. I suppose there are ways to leave a legacy by the impact that you leave on other people as well, through things that you've built. But I haven't necessarily heard people say, oh, I wish I built some big business or something like that. I haven't honestly heard anyone say that before, or become really famous. Yeah, I've not heard it in my experience, anecdotally anyway.
So what happens when you hang out with ambitious people? You sit down with someone and someone is like, I want to build $1 billion company, or I want to build something amazing. I want to write books and all these other things. And what's going on in your mind? Because I'm just kind of curious if you...
I don't think it's at odds anyway. I mean, I'm trying to build $1 billion company myself right now. So I don't think it's at odds. It's also what kind of motivates you. I'm not building this $1 billion company right now to be a billionaire. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm building this because I see the legacy that it's going to leave with Trehaus in particular. I am really working incredibly hard to build a huge company that's going to be able to impact as many people as possible, whether it's children who are going to go through our schools, families that are able to have that time with their children and that work-life balance as they work, and they don't have to choose between their careers and their families by working in our space and having their kids close to them. Also, we're building an educational technology platform, which allows us to be able to spread our content and our curriculum to schools around the world, especially schools where there aren't good curriculum. There isn't any good curriculum for a lot of rural schools, and we want to be able to equip the teachers in the schools there with great curriculum, and that will impact inordinate amount of children as well and decrease the inequality gap that we see sometimes. And these are my intention, to make that positive impact on as many people as possible, to be able to extend the difference that I'm going to be able to make in the lives of individuals. Like when I have a parent who comes and tells me, I'm so glad that you guys exist because I'm able to be close to my kids. And when I see children who are growing and being nurtured in our school and so confident and thoughtful and articulate, and I see that it's making a difference in these lives and extending it and seeing the impact in as many lives as I can, that's what drives me. So I don't think it's at odds. Being ambitious is not at all at odds with having an understanding of what matters in life. It's just knowing why you're doing it and kind of making sure that you are living your lives with that purpose in mind and not just blindly chasing something without truly understanding what you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve or what is going to ultimately give you that sense of, I've lived my life well. As long as you're doing it for the right reasons, it's very in line, actually, with mortality.
I love that ambition is okay as long as you have self-awareness about why you're being ambitious, and whether that's for legacy or for things that are more temporal. And one interesting thing is that, of course, you're someone who has both, right? You have that awareness of death, you have that self-awareness about who and why you are in your life, and you're also ambitious about growing and building. And one interesting thing is that there doesn't seem to be enough time for everything. So obviously, if we had infinite time, then we can have infinite time to be ambitious, infinite time to be with relationships, infinite time for the self-work needed. How would you think about time balance, trade-offs for people who want to be aware of all these things?
I definitely agree that time is a very precious commodity. It's something that we're blessed with and we should make the most of. And I have, so people, because I suppose I do a couple of different things, and I often get asked about how you balance my work as a doctor, how I balance my work as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship, by the way, is something that is like, it takes all your energy. It really does. That ties in earlier with about knowing your purpose. I think it's very hard to be an entrepreneur without really knowing your purpose and being driven with the mission, because there's really never enough time at all, is there, to when you're building something and you're building a business and you're trying to be the best entrepreneur that you can be. There's really never enough time. So you got to know what your priority is and why you're doing it. The why is just so incredibly important. But yeah, juggling that. And then, of course, being the best parent that every parent just wants to be the very best parent that you want to be. And I am the same. I want to be 100% the best parent that I can be for my boys. And how do I balance that? And sometimes I struggle to answer them. I did mention that I do have a faith as well that kind of guides this to some degree because, yeah, I feel called. Sometimes I do believe in what we call a calling. And I do believe that when you have a calling, you can be equipped with what you need to be able to fulfill that calling. But not everybody shares this same faith that I do. But I mean, I have to be honest and say that is one aspect that does shape a lot of why I take on so many different things with the confidence that I can do it all well. There is a deeper level of faith that is involved in that. But on a practical basis also, I do believe in this concept of seasons. I think that sometimes we try to be everything all at once. But actually, what has really helped me is to recognize that there are different seasons in our lives where we can be everything, but maybe just not all at the same time. So I had a season, for example, I really focused on my work as a doctor and really developing my skills as a doctor and in palliative care. There was a season then that I decided that I wanted to focus on being the best mom I could be. Not that I'm not a good mom now. I still think it's still a priority to me. But at that time, it's like a season where I take a step back and I was a full-time stay-home mom for albeit short season because I wanted to get back into work. And then a season where I was really building Crib, which is my nonprofit social enterprise for female entrepreneurs. And then there's a season now, which I think is a season where I'm building this business, Trehaus. It's just about having a mindset where at this particular season, something is a priority, where some other things may need to take a back seat. For example, Trehaus now is a priority. Crib still runs and everything, but it definitely, I'm less involved and I built out a team to sort of like run it without necessarily having to put all my mind space there. Being a mom, you definitely do. But again, it's a season where I feel like my kids are old enough now and they're in primary school for my older two boys. And there's time that has been freed up in that sense where I'm still very much in their lives. But again, it's a season where I don't have to be with them 24/7 like I was when they were younger. With my youngest son, he's 4. And that season ties in very nicely with my Treehouse season because in a big sense, Treehouse exists because of the problems I saw as a parent, and I wanted to be able to be in a place where I could solve all that. So with my youngest one, he actually goes to Treehouse school while I'm working at Treehouse. So I actually see him every day. I get to have that proximity with him. And while I'm building the business, I'm also building a business that will give him the best education and the best place he can be in his early years. So that ties in beautifully as well with this new season of building Treehouse and leaving that legacy through education and making sure that he really benefits from it. Like he's growing and thriving in it. And to me, that is such an affirmation that we're kind of using this season to build something that's very important and is going to make a huge difference for generations to come. Yeah, so I think this concept of seasons is something that has been very helpful in my life on a practical basis, and understanding that you have to look after yourself too. You can't be everything to everybody, but just know what your mission is, know your why, and that will help you to know your season and make sure that you give your all to your why.
How do people discover their why? Because that's a tough one that everyone's kind of scratching their head over. How would you think about it? Or how would you recommend someone go about for that process?
Don't even feel like I had to consciously think about it. My why was always pretty clear, even when I was young. So I feel like I may not be the best person to answer somebody who doesn't know their why. I've been kind of ingrained or like had a very strong sense of my why from very young, which was to impact as many people as possible and create a positive difference in the lives of others. So everything that I do is just, I wouldn't know how to get people to think about it actually, because it just comes clearly and just shaped me and just been so core to everything I do for such a long time. I haven't even thought about why I know my why. I know that's very helpful, but
Yeah, it is what it is. So the best way to know your why is to just know it already. And that's be like Elaine. Otherwise, there's a bunch of books after that.
yeah, I'm sure there are many books out there. I just haven't read them. Parenthood. I'm sure you as a parent too. I wonder if parenthood has also shaped your concept of your why. I don't know whether it has a bit of an influence on that too. Just, I don't know.
That's a fair point. I think as someone who has also worked in education technology, I worked with kids before, and now having my own kid, I think one interesting psychological difference, at least from my perspective, was what my friend described as contract with the future. And what I mean by that is just the moment you have a kid, that means you know exactly what's going to happen in 18 years, which is that your kid is going to go to college. In 21 years, your kid is going to graduate. Time progression that steps into place the moment you have a kid. And so most predict the future. And you almost count your years of the future by the age of your kid. I think that's one level. Also, the fact that your kids may also have kids of their own and your grandkids may have kids of their own. And so this means that you actually have contract with the future of humanity. And so the stuff that you do, how you're raising a kid today is important, but also how you think about the world and culture and society. And like I said, the legacy becomes really important because the truth is when you don't have kids, global warming is an issue that's going to take place in 100 years. It will be gone. But the fact that we have kids means that if it's totally cataclysmic, our grandkids will suffer that. And so our knowledge of us having future kids, what we want to call that, means that you're more aware about longer time scales. And I think that was a nice way we were having that deep conversation.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's so true. And it's a very clear legacy that you can see, I suppose, when we're talking about legacy. Yeah.
And so, Elaine, I'd love to kind of start wrapping things up here and just ask you, could you tell us about a time that you have been brave?
Well, I mean, you're an entrepreneur yourself. So I actually think that entrepreneurship takes a lot of bravery. And I think building this business as an entrepreneur, as a female entrepreneur, has been maybe the hardest thing that I've had to do. It's even harder than 3 kids, I think. I always say that Trehaus, which is my business, is my 4th child. And it's an incredibly challenging journey, I think, entrepreneurship, embarking on something where you're building a business, you have a responsibility to have investors, for example, raised around. You're protecting the faith that your investors have had in you and making sure that you return them that will make them really, really happy. And at the same time, building something that's really going to scale and grow and make a big impact. And there's just so many things that are involved in entrepreneurship. So many ups and downs. The ups can be really, really exciting, but the lows can be also so low. I started my business, Trehaus, and as I mentioned, it's got co-working, it's got an event space, and it's got preschool. And we started it also several years ago, but we moved to a huge location, 3.5 times the size of our previous one, in October 2019, which was just 4 months before COVID hit our shores. And so gosh, I mean, that was really, really challenging. We just saw all our revenues. It was just impacted by the COVID. Of course, I mean, we're so thankful that the business has done tremendously well since then, but it's really tough. It takes a lot of bravery. Again, think about, there are days that I wonder, why am I doing all this? Like, I could just be a tai-tai if I want to. Like, I think it would be quite nice. And I'm like, well, it'd be nice to be a tai-tai sometimes. But then at the same time, because I'm driven by my why and I'm driven by where it can go and what I can build and how much impact it can make and the lives is changing and building something is incredibly satisfying. It takes a lot of courage, I think, and to keep going as well when things are hard. I do really believe in that saying where it says that what doesn't kill you does make you stronger. And I do feel stronger. I really do. When things were hard, I do feel like I'm coming out with more wisdom, more strength, more courage. I'm still trying my best to be brave. So it's not also just a one-off shot, not just that first plunge into starting a business. It's every day being an entrepreneur takes an amount of bravery, I think.
Why is entrepreneurship so hard from your perspective?
Why do I find it hard? I think the difficulties are in, there are a few of them. I think the difficulties in, if you really want to build something that is truly impactful, that is a great business, there's a lot of things that have to work out. I mean, it's not just about having the great idea. You actually have to work incredibly hard to actually turn your vision into a reality. You also have to inspire and encourage a team and build an incredibly good culture and a team that is willing to ride that journey with you. You have to paint that vision of what it's going to be before it actually exists. So you have to do that as well. If you're raising outside investment, there's that necessary to sell that vision, but also to fulfill that vision for your investors as well. And then the thing is that so much of our journey as an entrepreneur is just unpredictable. A lot of factors that are out of your control. And so you need to be able to have that stability and that continued resilience to persevere when things just fall out of your control in not a positive way, and to just be able to ride that through and believe that you can carry your business through all of that. So I think all of that is a huge challenge. I do have to mention also that because I do run a nonprofit for female entrepreneurs, and this is a very big reason why I started it, because as a female entrepreneur, I think we also do face quite specific challenges. There are certain biases that do exist, unfortunately, that do make it a little bit harder for women to make their business dreams come true. Expectations of women's roles in culture and society that makes it hard for them to be able to plunge into entrepreneurship, which takes so much of our lives. You need to have very, very supportive partners who are willing to walk with you in an equal way. And I've got a VC husband who also very supportive, so I'm very fortunate in that sense. But there are also certain gender biases that a lot of people are not aware of, but they do exist. I mean, I mentioned earlier, like women get less than 3% of all VC funding. And this is in spite of the fact that all the research shows that women businesses tend to be more profitable, they provide better returns, and yet they get less funding. And there definitely, we do have to question whether we do have certain conditioning of certain biases. So just to give you an example of this, last year during Circuit Breaker, which is our lockdown here in Singapore, if you remember, it was a challenging time for my business. And my husband, he runs a venture capital firm that's quite global. So he was traveling a lot pre-COVID. But because of the COVID situation, he was here in Singapore. So he was able to spend more time with our sons. And I was really, really busy with my business, so I could spend less time with my sons. And he said, well, why don't I take over the home-based learning for now? Because you have to focus on your business and I have more time. And that made absolute sense. But somehow I carried with me this mom guilt, this guilt that somehow I had it ingrained in me that this is my job as a woman, as a mother. It is the role of the mother to do the home-based learning of the kids or whatever. And I had to realize that, gosh, I have been conditioned with the roles. As much as I'm a big proponent of empowering women and opportunities for women, I have been conditioned even myself with the roles that we are supposed to play in society. And I had to consciously remind myself that this makes sense and there's nothing to be guilty about. There's nothing to worry about. And this is just an example of the myriad of small biases that we hold in ourselves that make it a challenge that lead to these numbers. Less than 3% of VC funding to women-led startups. There's less than 5% of women in C-suite. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like it's a lot of cumulative issues. And I can go on for a lot longer, a lot of other factors. But we do face some challenges. And I started CRIB so that I could help to level the playing field a little bit and encourage people, encourage other women, make sure that strong networks, and they're not all boys clubs, making sure that there's good mentorship and role models so people think about the possibilities of them as women as well. and making sure that there are more people who are thinking about funding women businesses. I think a big part of it is that you also don't see a lot of investors who are women. And so we need to raise that as well and raise up more female VCs and raise up more women investors because they understand the businesses that women founders are going to start as well. And they also understand that it's absolutely possible to be able to have that drive and ambition and the ability to achieve as a female entrepreneur, even if you have a family. And that's the kind of future that I'm working with and the mindset shift that I'm trying to create, both with Crib and both with Trehaus. So yeah, it's hard. I think it's a hard journey, but it doesn't mean that it's not doable. And I want to tell women out there who are thinking about starting a business, you can do it, especially if you're a working parent, you can do it. As a society to help create that infrastructure, I see Trehaus as one of the pieces of creating that infrastructure, that space that allows you to have that work-life balance, that work-family balance, and to be able to achieve your business dreams as well, or your career without having to sacrifice your role as a parent. So that's what drives me.
Wow, that was a lot. Elaine, we've come to time, so thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd love to paraphrase the 3 big things I learned from this conversation. The first, of course, was thank you so much for sharing a little bit about how you became a doctor, which was that you want to be a doctor first and then be an entrepreneur later. So a smart way, I think, to do both. And I think that was interesting because we kind of got very quickly to the second thing, which was about, I think, death and life. I think about what it means in terms of seeing meaning and being present with the last days of so many folks and seeing that nobody regretted about work, but they did regret a lot about their relationships and how they spent their time. And I think that was a great discussion that we had about how that impacts how people think about life and how you think about life and what's important. And that is not necessarily a trade-off with ambition, but more of saying that let's just be more self-aware about what the ambition is about, which is really about legacy. And lastly, thank you so much for, I think, just sharing a lot about your why, about how you're tackling being a female entrepreneur and founder, and why you think entrepreneurship is hard, but also bringing that not just from a business sphere, but also from that trade-off dynamics, what you describe as mom guilt at one level, but other part describing in terms of the structural issues that are also at play. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share this episode with friends and colleagues. Sign up at www.jeremyau.com to discuss this episode with other community members in our forum. Stay well and stay brave.